Before we begin, thank you very much to George D for joining my Patreon campaign over at patreon.com/TJOmega. All the support there that keeps the channel going, I appreciate so much, no matter how big or little it is. Even if you can't afford to do that, I understand that is a big problem these days. All you have to do is hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed before, and just share the videos around that you like. That's it. Simple as that. So if this content coming at you every day is worth clicking one like button, that will help the channel a lot all by itself, and I thank you for doing it. Today's topic is going to be one that we don't really go over very often because it's so far out of my age range, but we do have to talk about it because it's a larger part of Transformers than I think a lot of people give it credit for, and that is the pre-Transformers, the toys you pick up for the youngest of kids to introduce them to what a Transformer is, and hopefully a toy line that won't break as easily as all your current ones. So we're talking about that today, and it goes back farther than I think some people even realize, like the photo you see in front of you today. Now, the first couple images do come from Sabertron.com. Full credit to them for the photos. That's their thing. I don't like to borrow from them, but these things are pretty obscure, and I don't really have any good photos of them other than this. So my only choice here in the matter. But these in front of you on the screen are called First Transformers. They were a play school line in 1986. So you think back to the original Transformers line, for 2 years we are borrowing not only the Diaclone line and the Microman line, but and Microchange and all that. But we're also starting to see toys developed for those lines that never came out in Japan starting to be produced for Transformers. And then everything that moves on from there. When they started having to do brand new toys, Transformers expanded in big ways. You had a lot more big figures come out, Metroplex and Trypticon, for instance, giant figures at the toy aisle. And while they were expanding in that direction, they also expanded to include younger kids. These were aimed at ages 1 to 3, whereas the larger Transformers were 5 and up. These are about as simple as you get, and they weren't even branded with any names. The fact they even have their own faction symbol, apart from Autobot and Decepticon, is kind of the only real distinction that really feels like Transformers. But you can see from the vehicle modes, they actually do form like nice looking little play school toys, and you can definitely see where the simple transformation comes from. The arms on the jet and the dump truck still very present. Now, these were never given any kind of name on American shelves. It's just the jet, the car. However, in Japan, these did come out, and they were titled Jet-kun on the left. On the far right, we had Racer-kun, and in the middle, Dump-kun. I will pity anyone who has to go through their life with the name Dump-kun. But that is a reality of Dump-kun's life, so let's not pick on him for it. This was the first foray into these types of Transformers, and later on, these kind of get... this idea like these super simple toys that younger kids could play with kind of gets blended into the main line a little bit. Throttlebots were very much in line with that. But by and large, this line and this idea was pretty much dropped for about 15 years before Hasbro decided to attempt something else for the youngest audience out there. And that brings us to Tonka's 1, 2, 3 Transformers. And that is where we remember Rescue Roy, who you see on screen. I think when Rescue Roy dropped, a lot of people did not know what to make of it. Keep in mind, 2001 was RID. We just came off of Beast Machines. We're just now getting Autobots and Decepticons back. We're getting like real Earth vehicles back all of a sudden. And they're all these super complex toys out of Japan, or they're recycles from G1, G2. And then this big guy just jumps into the fray. Rescue Roy, I think, is the one everyone remembers because, of course, like, he was a presence on a toy shelf. He was huge for back in the day. But he was not alone. The toy line did include quite a few of characters. So we had, this is Charlie Chopper on your screen. We also had Policeman Pete, Airlift Andy, and Fire Marshal Mike. I center this one out because later on we're going to be talking about more current kids lines, and that's where we get to characters like Blades from Rescue Bots, who this very much feels like his ancestor. So you can still see where they are kept as simple as possible. They have this like signature rounded look that a lot of like soft Tonka toys had. So it's an interesting blend. It's an interesting blend here, and not for honestly for something that's meant for like preschoolers, honestly not bad. Honestly, like they actually seem like Transformers. For lack of better description. This is going to continue on into late 2002 and 2003, where we get Playschool's Big Adventure Transformers. A little bit wordy, but it exists. And this is where we get things that were a predecessor to what we'll eventually be calling GoBots. But this started off a trend of these Transformers for simpler kids in a more modern time. And this is where we start seeing a lot of attempt to mimic what Transformers does, but in a much nicer way. A lot of these big adventures Transformers will actually have an Autobot symbol on them that's very soft and a lot friendlier looking than normal. This is also where they start trying to dot in just little bits of nostalgia and history, sometimes just for name dumping purposes, but also intentional homages as well. This was the first time we had gotten a Cheetor since 2000, I would say. And that was interesting to see a Cheetor back on the shelf that definitely has elements of the Beast Machine's design, but is definitely not the same character. And they would do things like this as well. There'd be one called Dinobot at some point. There was Buzzerbot, who reminded a lot of people of Waspinator. Little homages like that, but for the most part, they focused on bringing completely new characters to the table. And this is where they really, instead of just trying like Rescue Roy, Charlie Chopper, things that sound like they're out of Thomas the Tank Engine. This is the first attempt to create Transformers-esque characters in a toy line of their own. Now, of course, eventually this toy line does get rebranded into Transformers GoBots and then just plain GoBots. Sometime around Armada's release, Hasbro had this idea that they needed to split this brand out from the Transformers brand as a whole and let it exist on its own, which may or may not have been a good idea. But for whatever reason, they decided it should be its own thing. So GoBots became the kids line from Playschool. They dropped the Autobot symbol in favor of the Go Shield badge. And a lot of the same characters and styles were present in this line. It's literally just a continuation. Now, for these kids branded toy lines, this was the farthest they had gone with trying to create their own media property with this. Of course, we know this line also as Go Go GoBots, which comes from the theme song of the very short-lived cartoon, 4 episodes in total, only 2 of which aired on TV, and only those aired in very few markets. New York and Chicago, I think, were the only places that ever saw these on TV. But there was a comic as well, there was an online game, like they were genuinely trying. They were genuinely trying to make GoBots a big thing, even if they were not, the vintage GoBots. But they were trying to make some toys for younger kids and trying to make a whole media franchise out of it. Now, eventually, the shine wore off, and they started bringing the Transformers name back in to try and kind of boost sales up again. At this point, Armada proved very successful, and the Transformer brand name was in hot demand. About this time is when they started looking at doing Universe as well, as to get another Transformer line out into the marketplace to kind of meet this sudden demand for more robots in disguise. But the toys they were using were largely the same toys that they had been cycling out for, the last couple years. They add in some gimmicks, they add in some extra accessories and extra figures, but for the most part, it's the same toys just trying to keep a struggling brand going, and eventually, you just can't do enough to save it, and GoBots went the way of, well, the GoBots. From there on, the Transformers for the youngest crowds kind of get blended into the major lines. When the movies came out, of course, we started getting used to seeing very kid-friendly versions of all these characters. No, you're not gonna put a 3-year-old down in front of the original Transformers movie, but there's people who did, and there's people who wanted their kids to have Transformer toys. So in 2007, we had fast action battlers, and things like that would eventually give way to things like gravity bots, one-step changers, etc. Something that the youngest of kids can actually have a Transformer toy, like their big brother, or yes, even like their dad has, but in a much simpler and easier to understand format for them. So this is what we had for a long time. And then, of course, we get to the stuff that we actually are familiar with and recognize now. 2011 sees the birth of the Rescue Bots. I want you to keep in mind, the Rescue Bots, we have the adventures of Heatwave Blades, Chase Boulder, and various other ones here and there. This is the longest running Transformer cartoon ever. Let's see, it's 26 episode seasons for 4 seasons. So you're talking 104 11-minute episodes. Even if you shrink that down, that's still 52 like chunk episodes altogether. And this spanned 5 years. Okay? Okay, so like this wasn't like an Armada job where like they throw 50 episodes out in 1 year. No. 5 years of Rescue Bots new episodes. And of course, we continue that for another 3 years with Rescue Bots Academy, which doubled the number of episodes. So now, even if you're just taking it from raw airtime, it's still beating out G1 in number of episodes. That's insane. And like to hold that kind of like notable place in Transformers, to be the longest running animated fiction in Transformers history. And it's the preschool Transformer show. While we're trying to focus on like why aren't the cartoons any good, why aren't you doing more G1, why are you doing so much G1, over here Rescue Bots just kind of living their best life, doing their thing and like thriving. I think one of the reasons why Rescue Bots was so good at staying around for so long was just how smart their marketing was. So they had everything that other Transformer lines had: small figures, large figures, different scaled figures of the same characters. But what really set them apart was this willingness to break away from the identity of a character and just do different things. A lot of the Rescue Bots ended up sharing molds because everyone got the F1 car, everyone got the jet at some point, things like that. And they all had decos to match whatever characters that they were being at the time. It was really cool because you had so many different ways. You could have Heatwave. You could have like Heatwave, arguably your main character of the whole franchise. You could have him as his traditional fire truck in a million different ways. But you could have him as other rescue vehicles. Like there's an ambulance redone into Heatwave. You could have him as a rescue boat. You could have him as I think there's a rescue plane, a rescue chopper. Like there's like just the idea of like constantly recycling these bodies and these characters into completely different bodies. So the characters, kids could always buy up their favorite ones, but they're fresh every single time. Even if you only bought Heatwave as a kid, you've got a dozen different Heatwaves. It was brilliant marketing. It's a brilliant way of keeping them fresh and keeping them around. So, and yes, I have to acknowledge Rescue Bots Academy did actually produce a new hotshot. I am indifferent to this hotshot. It has done nothing to scorn me, and for all I can tell, considering it's a cartoon aimed at preschoolers, it's a hotshot who's way more mature and better written than the one in Armada. Figure that one out. These days, even that has gone by. So the time of Rescue Bots and Rescue Bots Academy has pretty much finished up at this point, and now there isn't really a kids branded Transformers show on TV. I think everything is being poured into Earthspark at the moment. There is no preschool Transformer cartoon anymore. Rescue Bots Academy finished the story, and we have had no announcement of anything to replace it. The toys have gone from Rescue Bots to Rescue Bots Academy, and now the same toys are being repainted and retooled for Classic Heroes Team, which is a little bit of Rescue Bots, but the more recent ones, and the ones I see people talk about the most, are actually based on G1 characters and other and older designs. I myself have this little Optimus Primal as a fiddle toy on my desk. You have a Gator Megatron that I still need to track down. You've got, a Megatron as a tank. You've got Starscream entering for the first time in the kids line. So even this line is kind of becoming tainted by the need to do nostalgia and the need to push the old characters as much as possible. Whereas these lines used to be kind of a gold standard for how to keep brand new characters fresh on a toy shelf for a long period of time. It's kind of unfortunate because those characters, you imagine, there's people today, they grew up with the Rescue Bots, That started in 2011. So today these kids are old enough to have, want to collect themselves, and they are old enough to remember the characters they grew up with and go, well, I kind of want that bit of nostalgia. I want the character I grew up with. And it's not there. Even if you go back to the current toys that were released the exact same way, they're the same style and technically the same line, they're not producing those characters anymore because they're going to G1 just like everything else. And there's no sign of these characters living longer than these shows. So if you grew up with the Rescue Bots cast, you want a new Blades, you want a new Boulder. Too bad. They're not making those characters. The only time anyone from Rescue Bots got the glow up into a main Transformer line was Blur. And I would argue because it's Blur, because it's a legacy name, and doing it in 2015 where you're talking aligned continuity, you can get away with making a Blur that's different from the traditional. It's still close though. You can, and it's, as much as like it's as different as like Sideswipe was in 2015. But to this day, that is still the only character from any of the play school and preschool lines to get any kind of advancement or any kind of promotion into being a fully fledged toy. And that is kind of a shame, because Rescue Bots came up with a way of putting Bumblebee and Hotshot in the same toy section. All you have to do is like focus on Hotshot's red colors instead of his yellow, and they can coexist. They figured out how to produce brand new characters with seemingly very little and keep them fresh for a long time. You think about characters like Heatwave, who have been a constant presence on a toy shelf for a decade. That's incredibly impressive, but nothing for the kids who have grown up and kind of want that character back. Because guess what? They're not retooling Inferno into him anytime soon. Not that we know of. So it's a really big missed opportunity, I think, for Hasbro. And a big shame for anyone who grew up with toys like this, who really do want to see that done. And I would like to see it done too. There's some really nice designs in Rescue Bots. You realize the girl whirl that I really like in Rescue Bots never got just like a plain helicopter at normal size. Like the closest one to her show appearance is like an 11-inch giant figure. She didn't get like a normal one. It's always like a VTOL style. Where's my girl whirl that just looks like she does in the cartoon? I kind of want that. And there's plenty of characters in there that I would imagine would make pretty good figures if they were willing to go for it. But we have yet to see signs of it. And for now, it looks like the play school lines are just going to feed into the G1 nostalgia, which turns them more or less from preschool toys to fiddle toys for, people like me that just needs to keep their hands busy at the computer. So that's your entire history of preschool Transformers. It goes back a lot longer than people think, and they have some acclaim and accolades to them I think a lot of people overlook, to the point where it really needs to be applauded more than it is. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little history lesson and musings about where they are going with this particular corner of Transformers. I hope it's something positive, because it's actually been kind of fascinating to watch, even if I'm not participating all the time. But I hope you enjoyed. I will see you next time.